Yes. Okay. I know this time period is probably feeling a lot of this, right? So it's a good topic for this time in the semester and in the world, in a sense there. But what we're going to talk about is ways you can also cope and helpful information that will help you and others. So this joke, it's kind of a bittersweet joke. It's a dark comedy in the sense that there's actually a lot of truth to this joke about, and we've talked about it, how unfortunately males are not encouraged to express their emotions as much as females are. That saying, as you all know by now, that I don't like, boys don't cry. Well, that is wrong. Boys should be allowed to cry when they need to. And sure, as we grow up in this world, we learn where to, I'm just realizing I might not have shared it properly. Did I share? Are you seeing it? No. That's okay. There's a cartoon here that I'll share. There we go. But as we grow up in this world, we learn how to, at least two things. We learn how to mask our emotions, but what we should also learn is how to express them, but in a healthy way. So maybe through music or privately, through your journal, through talking to someone. So we'll get into that more later. But the sad thing about this joke is that men do tend to be told to hold it in further. But of course, the joke is like, okay, boss, yeah, no, I haven't been in touch with my feelings for years, and I have the nervous breakdowns to prove it. So we want to, and a boss is quite impressed. So we want to shift that societal expectation and realize that it's good to express your emotions. So, all right. So, okay. So let me go to the next slide. I keep getting these chat messages, but okay, good. All right. So who would like to take a stab at defining stress? And I'm sure you've read the chapter. It's kind of, I'm going to move on because it's not a trick question on purpose, but it could throw people because the word stress should be used carefully because there's a difference. There's different stress words that are more appropriate in psychology. So for example, if we think of a traumatic situation or a dramatic situation that would cause trauma, or even a small thing, there's the small things in daily life, then there's the big things that could cause trauma. So either way, those are called not stress, but a related word. Can anybody remember the related word? That those would be called the events in one's life that might, and the key word is might, cause stress.
Traumas?
Yeah, traumatic experiences, traumatic events that could cause trauma, or they could cause stress. Pardon?
Sorry, stressors?
Stressors, right. Yes, right. That's what I was looking for. It's a derivation of the word stress that's more accurate. Those are events or things that are stressors. In other words, things that could cause stress. Why do I use the word could so strongly? I mean, if you think of the common denominator of all of us, it's like, well, the person is part of this equation. So because the person is part of this equation, whether or not we experience stress, it's up to us, or the degree of stress, or of course, a dramatic event, everybody's going to feel some stress, but how do we handle that stress? So the stress response, and these are key words, is what their response, and we can control it quite a bit, especially long term. And of course, there's other factors, not just our own attitude or training or education in how to handle stressors, but also the support we have in our environment, how long the stressor continues, how often it continues. So there's many other factors involved, and the degree to the stressor. You have a cranky person at the store is a stressor, but some people will freak out if the person's mean to them. Some people will just let it roll off like water off of a duck, deer duck. So, but those are the little ones that sometimes, if people let all of those things get to them, it can really add up, and it can create because of the way we deal with it, a chronic situation. But then you have the larger events that our stress response, individuals still have different levels of responses. And I'm also doing research not only on post-traumatic stress disorder, but also post-traumatic stress response. So, and growth, the growth that can happen from stress. So I like to emphasize the growth possibilities. And that's what, as psychologists, we're learning. So we'll move on from her, fortunately, mock stress freaked out look, but she's cute. It's funny, but let's, in real life, it's sometimes not so funny. So, okay, so here we go. We see the stressors as the events, that can endanger, at least we perceive them to endanger one's either physical or psychological well-being. So stressors, how we perceive them, will affect our stress response or our reaction. So now research has shown different aspects of the power, in a sense, or tendency for people or animals to respond to stressors. So Holmes and Rahe have shown 4 aspects that will affect the level of stress being perceived: controllability, predictability, major changes in life circumstances, and internal conflict. So I'll go through each one of them. But before I do that, just to also mention, the word trauma is more dramatic. And that really truly is on a high or a more extreme level. So you have natural disasters, war, rape, robbery, particularly armed robbery, etc. So there's different levels. So we'll go into that. That's just to clarify definitionally. But now let's look at these breakdowns. Well, later on, the breakdown happens. So I'll talk about it now and then just review it later. So controllability is very important in how much we respond. So if we have a sense of control over the event, most people have less of a stress response. You feel more, okay, I can handle this. So that's a good thing. And they've done it with rats and mice, the poor things, but they're through studies with them as well as, of course, studies with humans. That tends to be the case. Predictability, same for the poor little rat or mouse who's being tested. Say, for example, they're giving them shocks on their tiny little delicate feet. If the little guy or girl knows how often or when it's going to happen, if it's predictable, the stress levels that this little creature experiences, or a human, is less. Makes sense, right? With this little piece of knowledge, for example, I remember years ago after I first read about it, I was like, yeah, well, that makes sense. So next time I went to the dentist, I asked him, can you let me know, how many shots I'm going to get today, or how long will the drilling last, or can I just know information? If you let me know information, my stress levels will be lower, based on research. And so he did. Every dentist I've had, every new dentist, I'll tell them that, and they comply, and it helps. You imagine, you don't know, okay, am I going to get shot? Is he going to keep giving me shots, or is he going to drill? How long is he going to drill for? How long is this going to go on? So it does make it more stressful. And if I know, it's like, okay, I'll get 2 shots, then it's over. Then it's going to get better. It's helpful. So the little rats showed the same thing. If they knew they're going to get shocked once a day, right before lunch, it's like, okay, I'll deal with it. Like, no, happens once. That's how smart they are too. They know the future, and they can plan ahead. So there's little stress levels. Their cortisol, different ways of measuring was lower. Major changes in life circumstances. Yes, there's a chart on that shows the positive versus negative. The more even positive events, such as a wedding, that can still cause some stress levels, but less. But of course, the effects are less negative, clearly, and even less stressful overall. But nonetheless, to keep in mind, even if you're doing a whole bunch of great new things, it can still add, maybe pressure is a better word. But so those changes, internal conflicts. Remember we studied uh, cognitive dissonance, for example. So if you're feeling that's, for example, when your behavior doesn't match your values, but you might be doing something because society does it, so you keep doing it. And we're very good at justifying, because we don't want that. We don't want to believe that we might be acting against our values. So we'll find justifications for that, or for things we've done. Remember that little study with the turning of the game that they played, or like a boring task for an experiment? When people were asked afterwards, the two groups had different responses depending on what they were paid. People who were paid something kind of decent for their time said, yeah, no, it was boring. I did it for the money. People who were hardly paid anything said they enjoyed it. They honestly felt they enjoyed it, because that value, perhaps the theory is that, well, they value their time. Why would I waste my time on something so boring? I must have enjoyed it. If I kept going, I must have enjoyed it. Or, if I ate that second piece of cake, well, I must have been hungry, when you really weren't. You to want to solve these internal conflicts. So these are 4 aspects that affect the level of stress. Now, cognitive appraisal, remember the word cognitive is to do with thinking. So you're appraising, you're assessing the situation. So that is your interpretation of the personal meaning or the current circumstances. If we take things personally, it can be more stressful. And remember the wonderful lecture of Dr. Helms that was assigned. She had a good example of the person at the store, and if they were cranky to you or said something mean to you, you might take it personally and get angry and get upset. Oh, she hates me. Or you can take a moment, take a deep breath, and realize that, oh, this person doesn't even know me. They probably had a really long, difficult day, and your anger can turn into compassion. That's the power of your cognitive appraisal ability, or your cognitive thought processes. So that's where CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is the foundation of that. So yeah, it affects your emotions. So notice you can go straight from anger to compassion in a matter of a moment, just by chilling out, taking a moment, reappraising the situation. So the 2-factor theory of emotions is that they're the result of the, so there's a combination of, you have the unexplained arousal. Sometimes we don't know, why did that bother me so much? Later on, Freud would say, well, let's go deeper and let's see if maybe this person reminds you of someone in your youth in which you had a traumatic experience, and you might have repressed that memory because it was so upsetting. So maybe that person reminds you of them. So anyway, so there's that unexplained arousal, and then there's the cognitive appraisal for that arousal. Why am I feeling that way? But going back to the store, you can still, maybe the person didn't even say something mean to you. And you're like, well, why did she, or she just she didn't smile. It's like, oh gosh, she didn't smile. And you make a big deal of it. You might want to assess yourself. Well, why did I make a big deal of it? Or you also might realize that, well, hey, I had a bad day, so I'm misinterpreting everybody around me. We have that saying called rose-colored glasses, where she's seeing things through rose-colored glasses. In other words, in a positive way, turning everything positive, which of course can be a healthy thing, as long as you're looking at reality as well. You can look at something as, in fact, sad as the COVID situation and find the silver lining, find the positives that are in it. Okay, maybe you're spending more time with family, there's less pollution, etc. That's different than not looking at reality. But the other thing is that you can also, if you're in a bad mood, you might have, I don't know, gray colored glasses or something that makes things less positive. So that's up to us once we learn the skill of clear-headed cognitive appraisals. We can attribute that arousal as well. We might think, sometimes, and it comes out of people, it's like, oh, the world hates me. Sometimes it might sound funny, but sometimes a person literally feels that way, so you can, or again, let's stay with the same example of the cash register. You could erroneously, attribute, well, she made me feel terrible. It's her fault. Now, that doesn't help us. And it's still up to us how we respond, even if she was kind of a mean person. Again, even mean people likely are suffering though, and it's always good to keep that in mind, especially as psychologists. So before I go on, any questions or comments to add to that? All right, so I've already talked about the major changes in life circumstances, that indeed the negative events have a bigger impact, and of course the larger the event is, and the more common it occurs, more often it occurs. So again, that unresolved conflict, if a person is not ready or able to take a behavioral change, you will justify it. You will try to justify the action because it makes you feel better or less guilty. For example, I know someone who used to work in, they use the fancy word in England, abattoir. I think that's the word they use, which means slaughterhouse. Anyway, so I remember he said that, oh, well, animals don't have feelings at all, which is any psychologist, any scientist we all know, it's pretty obvious. Anybody with a pet, it's obvious they do, and it's well researched, from neuroscientists of Cambridge Declaration of Consciousness to on and on and on. But anyway, he really was determined, I think for his own peace of mind. And, I give him a big virtual hug because, I think, he's a normal guy and he needed to earn money while he was in college or whatever. And so he worked at this job. So I feel sad for the workers too, because they have to work out this conflict. So I felt bad for him, but to help him, his own self, sleep at night, he convinced himself that they don't have feelings. And you'll see that a lot. I also have a colleague who did her PhD on people who do animal testing, and they would handle their own conflicted emotions in a similar way. They don't feel. Monkeys don't feel. I mean, clearly that's way off the mark, but to sleep at night, it helps a person when they say it and they convince themselves. So that's important to know. Anytime, even a goal though, even let's go away from cognitive dissonance, even things that are two goals, you want both. So even something in the future, and deciding on these things that might conflict. There might be a situation where your parent wants you to major in one thing and your heart wants to major in psychology. I've had students with that conflict who had a couple last year who majoring in business. They went there because their parents wanted them to, but their heart didn't want to do that. And so they switched to psychology. And so they were finally able to, I think, work it out with their parents and I think the parent at least wanted them to try, so you can, maybe some of you were in that situation. So we can come upon these throughout our lives with lots of circumstances. So post-traumatic stress disorder. So these are some of the symptoms. Sometimes you see the symptoms right away. Sometimes they show up later. Sometimes it's only they show up during a trigger. So say if you were in a war situation and you were in a terrible situation where there was gunshot. So every time you hear fireworks, for example, it might trigger that traumatic response. And and also same thing happens, and it sounds quite similar. There's actually some places where they're trying to outlaw at least fireworks that have the sound, because animals also, you get really scared. I mean, how do you explain to them that this is a fake, this isn't something that will kill you? We've evolved to be afraid of loud sounds for a good reason, because usually super loud sounds can be harmful. Anyway, other effects can be that you have nightmares, that you have trouble sleeping, that you are detached from your emotions, that you don't even let yourself experience the emotion. I guess I'll stay with, because I do also research on people who work with animals. So another situation was a man who, and again, I think he was a good guy, which I think is all the more why it brought him so much pain. But, he had, again, kind of with family background, he came into a family had pig farms, etc. He had a little pig farm, but in order to compete with the factory farms, he had to start to treat his own little farm like a factory farm to kind of rev up production. So then he put them in these little pens and stacked them on top. And it was just, miserable for him, but he cut off his emotions in order to deal with it. And he was actually, when he was interviewed, very large man. Now, he probably masked his emotions through eating, whatever, and he just had zero facial expression. And as we know, remember the experiment we talked about in the emotion section, where when people saw a disturbing video, this was an experiment, they saw a disturbing video, but they were told to not show emotion, that their heart rate, their physiological stress response increased because they were holding in a natural expression. So this poor guy was cut off. Plus, you don't want to feel, right? Sometimes when people do self-harm, it's because they want to feel. They've learned to cut off their emotions because life is too painful. So this guy cut off his emotions. And the reason I'm also glad to tell you this story is because later he did change his behavior. He couldn't stand it anymore. So he turned his farm into a sanctuary. And so the rest of the pigs became, saved, his friends basically, and he used his land for plants. And when he was interviewed years later, he was slim, he was joyful, he was like a totally different person. Amazing. So anyway, I'm very passionate about, people, happiness. I don't want anybody to be sad. Okay, what else might cause post-traumatic stressor? What other business or whatever careers? Anybody have ideas?
Maybe like an abusive relationship or death of like someone in the family, or even like long-term chronic illness.
Sure. Yeah, and I didn't even, you're right. It's absolutely when you are having to deal with a chronic illness in your family. That's a very good example. Sure. That can, and also even a sudden death of a family member. Yeah, because the chronic illness can also, you can have a low grade chronic stress response, but also the sudden death of someone can cause post-traumatic stress disorder. Good. What else? You can either mention an event or a career. Yes.
I'm sorry, car accidents?
Sure, absolutely. Sure, that could cause, and you can, even have trouble getting into a car for a long time. Yes, so good. Really, any dramatic event, Yes, Jan?
Isn't it dependent on sensitivity of the person? So could it also be just like a child losing a pet or like even a stuffed animal that they have a very strong bond to? It just really depends on the sensitivity of the person.
Yes. And even for adults with real animal, like their pets, there's that unconditional love. And sometimes they might be embarrassed, but actually the sadness can be just as strong and as real as when a human, you don't want to admit it, the person doesn't want to admit it, but it can be just as traumatic, especially if you were with the animal for years and there's a real connection. There's this beautiful experiment that actually with dogs and their guardians that showed that even when they looked into each other's eyes, they both activated oxytocin, which is the love hormone, like the transmitter that gives you that good feeling. So when you hug or when you do something kind, you activate oxytocin. But anyway, so yes, so that bond can be very strong, and therefore the death can, at least maybe not post-traumatic stress disorder, but at least, or it could, but at least sadness or depression. And as far as careers, a soldier, of course, somebody mentioned, of course, yesterday, a police officer, and also both a soldier and police officers, sometimes when society is also going through a time when they are being not accepted, like after the Vietnam War, which was a war in the US that rightly so, people started to question the validity or the justification for the war. So most of the people in the US were against the war, rightly so. It was a terrible war. It was a sad war that we didn't want to get involved in, etc. But so the sad thing is, the soldiers it was their job. So when they came home, it was the first time apparently in U.S. history when the soldiers weren't welcomed back. And so their post-traumatic stress disorder levels are even higher, according to certain statistics, and their suicide rates are higher, and because there's also, they come home and there's no support system. So I also have to say, I mean, even though indeed certain police officers recently in the news in the US, for example, can be terrible, can abuse their power, but it's fortunately a small percentage. Most police officers go into the career to protect. I mean, my husband's African American, and he went through a whole period of fighting to get more police officers in his neighborhood to protect them. And when more police officers came in, there was less crime. So, I mean, so they mean well, but right now there's this whole anti-movement, and so the stress levels are going up. So anyway, so depending on a time frame on the societal response as well, that can make a big difference. So I will move on to another, slaughterhouse workers have, for good reason, high amounts of post-traumatic stress disorder every day. It's the most mild shot I could show, but I'll move on. But they have they're killing over and over again, crying, screaming, writhing creatures, and there's blood. And also now there's an added thing with COVID. I mean, the environment, it's blood and guts, and it's very unsanitary. There's a lot of illness that comes out of working there too, and also injuries, and they're speeding up the line and they're cutting their own hand. I mean, crazy. Food Inc. even there was a documentary years ago about it, but it's gotten even worse because of financial interests of the corporations. They're speeding up the killing line. So it's a terribly stressful, and again, I mean, I have links here to peer-reviewed studies. Really, the majority of people interviewed have the symptoms of it, and again, will try to live with it. So I feel bad for them as well, because, well, it's particularly if they really have no other job to support their family with. There is a movement of creating more plant-based options so that people have, they can work on farms that don't involve violence. So it's changing. But now let's look at the cultures now. Yes. So this is an interesting one, and this relates to the book, also discusses this study. This was a major same level earthquake studies. So then afterwards, they looked at the stress responses and the post-traumatic stress disorder levels of people in 3 areas. So white Americans, African Americans, and Mexicans. So the first 2 groups are in America, but very different response. Very interesting. The theory with the African Americans is that what do you think? What do you guys, does anyone remember from the book why that might be, what the theory is as to why such a difference, especially in Mexico, but why the difference even in America among different cultures? Which I do have to say, my husband's African American, but we both kind of came from, it doesn't mean you're a different, just because you're black or white doesn't mean it's a different culture in a way. I mean, I feel like in so many ways, my husband and I came from really the same culture. But in this case, overall, there are differences and also regional differences. So anyway, why do you think the difference in this study might have been? Does anybody remember from the book? Well, in the interest of time, I'll just maybe give a hint. Starting with the African Americans is that, well, there seems to be, the families are structured a little more equally. There's less expectation that the mother will stay home all day. And staying home all day can be nice, but it also can lead to a lack of a feeling of control. Remember, we talked about one of those factors that's very important in stress response levels is that feeling that you have control over your life. So if you don't have a job, or you don't have a means to work or get out of the house or be on your own, that can add to a fear level. It can be harder to handle things. So a dramatic event. So in the case of Mexico is a very strong difference because, again, culturally, at least in 2001, most of there's a very strong societal expectation that the woman is at home, and and isn't even supposed to work. So it's a little more dramatic, as you can see by the graph there. There's a beautiful educational program started by a psychologist, though, she started it to tackle gangs in Mexico. She started it with Guatemala, certain South American countries where what she called machismo and toxic masculinity existed very strong, where the man is raised. Remember how I talk about boys being raised to not cry, for example? Same kind of thing, to an even more intense degree. Boys can't cry, and your response, it should be violence. It should be, you should be the head of the household, and you should put her in her place. You're not a man unless you put the woman in her place. Your dad did that. And so it was a toxic pattern that had developed and led towards violence, etc. And so she started with the family, this psychologist, and with kindness, though, and with understanding that, hey, these are decent people. They're following the patterns of their parents, their grandparents. It's not their fault. In that sense, it's a pattern that if we educate and talk to them and re-educate about gender equality and those kinds of ideas, we could maybe make a difference. Well, CPREV, the acronym is CEPREV. Amazing. The difference it made, and there's a documentary, I should put the link up, it's beautiful, because the transformation in the families, when they realize these patterns, it's like, oh, wow, really helps. So the levels of gang violence, gangs, drugs, murder rates went way down. I think it was 36% within just a few years of this kind of re-understanding of what a cultural norm should be. And then the women were free to work, and you could just see if they wanted to, and the men were doing dishes sometimes when they came, just like a fair. And the men at the end of the video of the documentary, this man who felt that it would be too feminine to play with his child. So sad. At the end, you see him play with his child, and everybody's more joyful. It's just amazing. So anyway, I just had to say that because 19 years later, I bet you if this same study was done again, it would be less dramatic of a difference. They're wonderful people. Obviously, we're all the same biologically. The human brains are all the same. It's just we have different specific cultures that, as the world gets smaller, in a sense, we're hopefully learning about things that help us be happier and have a more peaceful society. And hopefully we're not picking up negative things, although sometimes we do. Anyway, thus, age limits for full access to the internet, etc. So, because there are negative things out there as well. Anyway, okay, I think I have time for one more panel. Actually, this is a good place to stop. And it's about 13 till the hour. So we can start right on the hour and 4 o'clock. So I will see you all at 4 o'clock, and we'll finish up. Okay, so have a good break.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see all right, I'm back. Okay, it's 4 o'clock, and we will dive back into the PowerPoint. Okay, so in the expansion and review of the material. Okay, so other responses to stress, as is mentioned, anger and aggression. Often it starts with frustration, and then it comes out as anger, apathy, and depression. I gave the example of even the man who didn't even want to face his situation. But also, learn helplessness. Remember, I've talked about whether it be the elephant that as a baby couldn't break out of the chain and just assumed as he got older, or learned after trying probably hundreds and hundreds of times to get out, he gave up, assumed that he couldn't break through a chain when as an adult he easily could. Happens to humans. I give an example of mathematics. You might not have studied or had a helpful teacher or whatever the reason, somebody might not have done well in mathematics earlier in life. And so you might have the ability to be great at mathematics, but you don't, you assume that you're not going to be able to do it. And my husband went through that. Turns out he was very good at mathematics. He just had an earlier experience in which he, thought he wasn't good at mathematics. So cognitive impairment also, just even when we are being faced with I do want to point out, sometimes you can sharpen, a little bit of adrenaline, I've talked in the past, can help your mind sharpen. It might help you focus. So all stressful situations, sometimes people think even sharper, although sometimes if we also get used to that, or sometimes even to the result of procrastination, for example, we can put ourselves in a stressful circumstance and then it forces us to focus. I've been there. It's like final exams are coming up, right? I shall share this to encourage you to not wait to study, to not allow the procrastination bug to get you, not to be too much in your phone or etc. Yeah, but then, the night before the test, and suddenly you have all this focus, it was like adrenaline. So sometimes people use it to focus, but other times people's brains do shut off, especially for very serious things. The emotions take over naturally. So you have that emotional arousal that can really get in the way. Also, distracting thoughts. Again, on a smaller level, say you're taking a test, you might have worry results. Oh, I didn't study enough, or, oh, what if I do bad? Try to stay in the moment, take a breath, keep your breathing slow and just focus and just do your best in the moment. And you can train yourself to keep your focus, keep in the moment, and to not allow distracting thoughts to get in the way. Or even, if you're hungry, like for the quiz today, it opens up at 6, but if you want to take a break, a little more of a break, get something to eat so that you're not thinking about food, or that your blood sugar is not too low. Even though everybody has the same amount of time, 50 minutes, if you can start later, and I've opened it up to last until 6:45, because anyway, to give people plenty of chance, maybe you want to review and have some water, etc. So anyway, so you can train yourself to not react in negative ways. So here's the classic, of course, fight or flight response. The stressor is the dog, the hypothalamus gets activated, etc. You have the fight or flight response. I also must mention there's a third response that humans and non-human animals can experience, is the freeze response. And that's not unprecedented. It can happen. So sometimes people, even in the experiment that Milan shared, I encourage you to watch it. It's very interesting. But some people seem to have a freeze response. Little opossums, sweet little opossums in nature, they do freeze when they're afraid, and they play dead. So and sometimes that can save them. In nature, they've evolved to do that. In their case, because they're kind of, they're not so fast and they're not that small, but so apparently it's helped them, depending on their environment, by not moving. It's like humans can happen. I shared with one of the sections, she was a friend of a friend. I mean, I've met her, but I just don't know her that well. But she was in the trade towers, and as she was coming during the bombing, so in New York, she was coming down the stairs. She was on a very high floor. She froze at one point, and this very kind man picked her up and was carrying her down. But then she saw that he was having trouble breathing. There was smoke, and she felt fine by then. So she said, "No, I'm fine. Thank you very much. You can put me down." So he put her down. She started to move a bit, and then she froze a second time. And at that point, a young man was able to pick her up and carry her to safety. And she was able to actually get to know him anyway, and it was a beautiful thing. But she's this normal person, and you sometimes don't know, unless you're in this extreme circumstance, how you might respond. but people can have that third response. We've talked a lot about the mind-body connection. So when we are especially chronically exposed or allowing ourselves to respond in a certain way, our reactions when they're not as healthy, we can be vulnerable to illness. So especially now, anytime, but you can raise your immune level by staying calm and being kind to yourself, whatever it is that is good for you, meditation, yoga, jogging, music, etc. And also even what we eat, antioxidants, lots of fruits and vegetables, things that will help you raise your immune system. But chronic stress, indeed, peptic ulcers is a classic one. I have to say, I've come a long way because in high school, I was 17, I had them, and they gave me medicine for that. I worried all the time. That's why psychology, it's such a good, I think that's one of my attractions, is like, wow. And it's actually after I got out of high school, meditated, etc., because I just was constantly worried about things. So, and then also chronic stressors can contribute to heart disease, and the environment itself can be, again, a factor, but again, it depends on your tendency, how you respond. So again, if I can learn how to turn stressors around in a positive way, then you can actually grow from stressors. And that's another reason I'm interested in the research behind it. As I mentioned, it affects your immune system. It can, it's like your body's ability to defend itself. So you want to be kind to yourself and always strengthen your immune system. And again, remember, I've come back to this factor again, but controllability. The less you feel control, it will have a greater impact on the immune system, as you can see with that cultural study, for example, how depending on the culture, it turned out that the women who had less control in their lives or who perceived less control had a more negative response, both post-traumatic stress disorder, but also in studies that show the health effect, lowering of the immune system. Now, also people in industrialized societies, your behavior, if you're smoking and all these other things, of course, those add to the factors of, and also you can, yes, I talk a lot about positive things you could do, right? So on the flip side of that is that if you reduce those, if you, under a stressful circumstance, somebody, say, for example, who ran every day or did meditation every day, if they not only might do something unhealthy, but they might do less of a healthy thing. So the combination of reducing of healthy habits and the increasing of negative habits can increase physical and physiological reactions to stressors. Cognitive theory, optimistic attitude has been shown to really help. This is where positive psychology comes into play. Really, we all can become solutionaries. You see that every problem can be solved. And I actually believe that. And maybe, again, over the years, I've trained myself to believe that. But I've also discovered it. I think, I think if we don't believe it or give it a chance, we might not attempt to solve something, for example. So I think I've resolved so many problems throughout my life. I have more confidence in myself and in the ability for problems to be resolved. So I can say that now I feel like a much more optimistic person, and that really does help. So our sense of appraising a situation, I've developed in general a life state that any problem I can look at it as a challenge. I tend to. And if you look at it like if you see a mountain, one person can look at a big mountain and go, wow, what a great challenge. Let's climb it. Another person can look at the same mountain and go, oh no, this is a horrible thing. I would never be able to climb it. Imagine right there, the two people will have different success levels, even if they're trained equally in mountain climbing. So your mind is very powerful. We have a gold medal rowing champion who is a psychology student. And one of her reasons for studying psychology is because at the London Olympics, which she won the women's gold medal for, she had an injury at the last match or the last round. And her mind was all she had left. She felt, her ability to overcome with her mind the limits of that injury, she felt that was the difference it made for getting that gold medal. So the mind is very, very powerful. And so keep that in mind. And you've seen that in history. Sometimes when something very dramatic, the strength of the person can increase. A mother protecting her young, whether she's human or that. We hear of a saying called mother bear. She will defend her child. Mother cows, poor things, they'll try to, if possible. They're such docile, nonviolent creatures. But there was one story that was dramatized. This mother trying to stop, and it was a dairy farm. They do it all the time, but I think, after her third child, she tried to stop the person. And so they called the cow crazy. It was like, no, she was a mother trying to save her child. So anyway, all perspective. So anyway, we can become even stronger or go against our tendencies or our natural tendencies like the cow did. Cows are, again, so sweet, but, you're losing your child, or possibly using your life. We might find a strength. Some people will freeze. Some people will find a strength even more than they thought they could have. So mind over matter can be very, very powerful. 3 components also that are interrelated with factors that affect how severe the perceived the stressor is commitment, control, challenge. So if you look at that mountain example again, if you're committed, or even a relationship, if you're committed to it, and you have a sense of equal control, you have discussions and a challenge. And even with the mountain, maybe a physical example is even easier. But if you think of those 3 components, that will help you overcome the mountain or reach the summit of the mountain, and also help you keep a peaceful or even develop. I've been married many years, and it keeps getting better because we work on it, so it can actually help your relationship even better. So those 3 components have been shown to help. Now, moving on to type A versus type B patterns. This is a famous personality categorization that I do want to speak to. There is something to that. We all have different personalities and different tendencies, but I need to clarify or emphasize that it's not about character. The book, I'm not saying they're wrong. I mean, it's a great book, but a couple of the statements in the chapter I felt, might be misleading in the sense that as though a type A person is an angry person or a more negative person. That is not the case. Think of them as neutral personality patterns that you can respond. Maybe the type A might tend to respond in a more stressful or a stress response way, but I want to go back to character. So if we think of character in terms of morality, the type A person might be that activist out there trying to save the animals, or Martin Luther King saving the people who were being oppressed. I think famous people throughout history who have made a difference in social movements have probably more often than not been type A. In order to fight against a trend, you gotta kind of have that extra energy, and sometimes that tendency maybe towards having a temper or anger can be used to fight injustice. So it's not about character. It's about just personality type. What would be a circumstance in which type B might be a negative thing? I mean, again, if they're both have their values, it's just personality traits. So say a type B personality who maybe is less prone to act or be impatient or on a simple level, they might become not as involved in their work as they need to be to do well in that job. That could be an example. But in terms of our social influence examples, remember we had these things that you could choose for the essay, the midterm essay. There was cognitive dissonance, which I referred to today. Does anybody remember another one in which having type B personality might have a negative effect? What were some of the other theories?
The bystander effect could be.
Melina, very good. Yes, that's the example I was thinking of. And how is that? What would happen? So in the bystander effect, as you mentioned, I mean, it's a good example because as the title suggests, it's when a person doesn't take action, when action should be taken. There's the difference, the diffusion of responsibility. You also see it in the moral dilemma experiment. You assume others, diffusion of responsibility, also the tendency to, that means that you think, well, somebody else will, you diffuse, put the responsibility on someone else, that they might do it. The other is also pluralistic ignorance, where you think, well, nobody else is responding, so it must be okay. That is also another thing that can happen. But either way, a type B would probably be less likely to take action. It's like, well, so sometimes when action needs to be taken, you want that type A personality to jump up and say, oh, this isn't right. So anyway, so it comes back down to character, but also in those cases, it doesn't mean that the person in a bystander situation, sometimes they really do feel that it's not their place, or that they really do feel it must be okay. But I think, again, having that more laid back personality, you might more likely assume, well, I don't really need to take action because they'll be okay. So there can be negative consequences to it as well by inaction. There's negligence, and then there's abuse, even in the terms of different types of problematic behavior. So again, it comes down to character and also some circumstances that are important. So I preface with that because, but it does, if the type A characteristic does come out as losing temper often, or, being impatient to an extreme degree, then you can also, there could be an indirect effect of losing social support, also just have that chronic arousal. So that type A person might need to do more meditation. Again, they might be doing fabulous things for society, but they need to take care of themselves more, make sure they're getting sleep and exercising, whatever it is for that person. So moving on from type A, type B, coping skills for everyone. There's two main types. As the first one suggests, problem-solving focused coping is certainly, like I like to use the word solutionary, assessing the problem and solving it, working towards solutions. Now, emotion-focused coping is very much more broad, and we'll spend more time on that. So you've got the problem is straightforward, you define the problem, generate possible solutions, pros and cons, and you're less likely to experience depression because it comes back to that control idea, or that, that, okay, well, I can solve this, and that gives you a sense of control. Also, that reminds me of people with overcoming addictions, people with a stronger feeling, a stronger locus of control that they can overcome themselves, more likely to be able to overcome the addiction rather than putting the control outside of themselves. So research does show that. So let's move on to emotion-focused coping. So there's many different ways that people can cope. And the first sentence about avoiding your negative emotions there's a key, the phrase after that is important, because at some point, if we think of mindfulness, it's helpful to recognize emotions, but the key is to not let them overwhelm you. That's a difference. So mindfulness encourages us to look at them more from an objective stand and a stand of curiosity rather than an emotional, easier said than done, but to not ignore your emotions, but to not let them overwhelm you. So that's an important difference. It is healthy to, at some point, recognize your emotions. But the key here I want to focus on is not letting them overwhelm you, and also not letting them prevent you from solving problems. So there's many things we can do. Behavioral strategies, physical exercise, venting anger, I want to point out they're important how we do that, not just yelling at your neighbor or your family or somebody. That's not what that phrase refers to. It's more how do we get it out in a negative, in a positive way, or in a value creative way, hitting the pillow at home, or writing a letter that you never send. You don't want to, by hurting somebody else, that's not going to help anyone. Sometimes, of course, you need to discuss things. You need to, write a letter, please stop factory farming. Obviously that's different, but writing a letter to your poor mom who was mean to you 10 years ago for something, is not going to help her or you. But anyway, I think you get the picture. Venting it or finding a way, even through music, metal music, it can be therapeutic, just singing those songs, as long as you don't overdo this stuff. But the cognitive strategies, now temporarily setting a problem aside, again, can be fine. I mean, I have many years of whether you're teaching or performing. I mean, you have something happen right before a performance or a class. I mean, you've got to temporarily set it aside, and just do your best at the task at hand, and do your best as a teacher or a singer. I mentioned because I had a very dramatic, it's very sad. I mean, my father had been ill for a long time, but the day that he passed away many years ago, I had a performance. It was a huge performance. It was a very large benefit concert. And I was performing with Chaka Khan, and many huge deal. And I'm not going to cancel and just not show up, thousands of people. And so I went, and I just pulled myself together, and I dedicated it to my father. I said it to the whole audience. So I dedicate this to my father. I didn't tell him about his passing, but I just said, I dedicate this to my father. Anyway, I did my best, and I just got into the music and did the show. And then afterwards I cried. I had to, I had to. I've had many cases. Anyway, you just, so that's a strategy. And the key word here is temporarily. If I had not then mourned properly, that's a whole other thing. And there's therapy for that. Music therapy, for example, helps people who haven't healthily allowed themselves to experience something that they should. You have a death of a parent, you should mourn, but anyway, seeking emotional support from others, absolutely great. That's why we have the counseling center. That's why, sometimes it can be a good friend, but make sure sometimes it's not so healthy. You have a friend's like, hey, let's just get drunk once in a while. Maybe if you're not overdoing it, and if it's during the holidays, whatever. I'm not saying never, ever, but sometimes, quite often, that's not the healthy thing to do. So it's called maladaptive strategies. Excessive drinking or rumination comes from, I used the cow example earlier. Well, also that comes from cows. They ruminate their grass, they chew the grass, and they're ruminating. So that word comes from that action of over and over doing something, and that helps. They're basically digesting. Anyway, it helps when we chew. It helps us to digest. So ruminating in psychology terms uses that as a visual, but to mean that when you ruminate about a problem, you keep going over and over, either, why did I do that? Or what should I do? Or, when you're going around in circles, that's what that means. That's not healthy. You've got to move on from that negative thought pattern at some point. So, but yeah, so finding somebody, a parent, whatever, who is a very, healthy supporter is very important. And to avoid the maladaptive strategies, talking and writing about your emotions. Journaling has been shown. It's very helpful. Writing for well-being. I have a illustrative example I'll give you. So I'll draw a very skillful illustration of myself, and I'll show you what can happen. These are my worries, right? These are your worries. This could be any one of us. This very detailed illustration could represent any human beings who've got these worries. So then you take your worries onto the paper. You can keep this illustration. Sorry, that looks like a flag. If you could transfer all those crazy thoughts that were in your head to the piece of paper, then you can go to sleep. Is this an example of writing? So before I go to sleep, especially I got the job, and this could be positive things or worrying about students or whatever. I have 1,000 things to do as dean and teacher, etc. So I have like a million things. It seems like, not literally, but it feels like a million. You write down. You can all do this with school. I'm sure you have, oh gosh, I've got to study for this. I got to study for that. Oh, I got to call my mom, whatever. So you write them down before you go to sleep, or you have a notepad next to your bed. And then you, sometimes in the middle of the night, I literally did it last night. I woke up in the middle of the night, thought of all these things I need to do for you, and I wrote them down, and then they were out of my head, and I could just go back to sleep. So that's very helpful. And then moving on, as I mentioned before, the quality of support matters. So now I want to turn the last bit of the class today over to you. I'd love to hear some behavioral techniques that you use to manage stress. You see here as examples, a hobby, meditation, nature, exercise, time management, for example, working, it could be working out with a counselor sometimes, just to help manage your time better, music, humor. So these are in general examples, but I'd love to hear specific examples from some of you, whoever would like to share. So who would like to share some strategies that you use to lessen your stress response and to cope with things, the difficulties in life?
It's not really a technique, nothing complex, but I play the piano.
Wonderful. Oh yeah, music, absolutely. Listening to music is very helpful, but actually playing it is even more powerful therapeutically, or it can be. Yeah, and it's very wonderful. It is, all your focus goes there, and it's a very good strategy. Great. Who else would like to share something?
I eat a lot and play video games.
What do you do?
I eat a lot and play video games.
And play with what?
Video games.
Okay, right. And those are good examples in that when we eat, like if I'm under, I like to eat a lot, and if I just know for myself, and I also know even just historically, like weight levels in my family. If I weren't vegan, I would probably be a very big person because I like to eat a lot. And so I can relate. There's what's called emotional eating. But what I've found over the years that if I just make a big, yummy salad, throw the balsamic vinegar and olives and tomatoes and chickpeas, whatever, giant salad, I can eat to my heart's content, but I won't get fat. So I have to plan ahead, especially when I know I have a big deadline due and it's a writing thing. In fact, I had a big deadline due Monday morning. So all day Sunday, I had to work. It was for the National Institute of Health article, a manuscript that I had to finish on time. And so I knew I would be eating, but I made sure I got a lot of fruit, because I get a sweet tooth when I have stuff. So you're studying for your finals, know yourself, because I know I get hungry. So I plan ahead. So when you go shopping, get really healthy munchy foods, because I knew I would want to eat a lot. So anyway, so that can be for better or for worse, because we don't want to eat donuts but all day, because then you feel sick. But anyway, so it could be a maladaptive, but it's also, if you see that tendency in yourself, you can make it a good thing. Oh, I'm going to eat even more fruit than anyway, and you satisfy your sweet tooth. And now video games also can be very good. I mean, sometimes people overdo it, just like anything internet. There's internet addiction, but there's also video games can be very occupying. They can be very helpful. I think probably a very good way to relieve stress, as long as it's, I think one of the things with internet addictions or video game addictions is when you find it prevents you from doing something. If you're doing it X amount of hours beyond, it could even be just going on Facebook or whatever. If you find it's preventing you from doing something, then it becomes a problem. If you find it calms you and you can do it for an hour and it's just then it's great. So that's one of those fuzzy areas where it can be positive or negative if it's in excess. So anyway, thank you for letting me use your examples as good examples, but when done to excess, they can sometimes then turn into maladaptive, like maybe avoidance or unhealthy if I'm eating cookies all day. So anyway, okay. But any other examples?
For me, I have driving to give me a sense of control.
Ah, sure,
So
sure.
like every 2 days, every second day, I go for a drive.
Ah, okay, nice. And do you find that if you're in the countryside, is it particularly?
Absolutely, yeah. It's the change of atmosphere, just experience,
Yeah.
especially not maybe not in the Czech Republic so much, but I used to live in Seattle, and there you
Ah,
went from a mountain area that's completely snowy, then you go down into a desert-like area, and you just go through all these biomes, sort of.
nice. Yeah, I can imagine. Yes, especially if you enjoy it. I mean, I enjoy driving, and so I can understand. You know, if it's some people don't enjoy it as much, but that's a good, nice example. Okay. Anything else?
I usually just start to make fun of the worst scenario that can happen, and it's
Right.
kind of all right after.
Right. Right, to relieve your fear, it's like a cognitive appraisal in a sense of like, well, what's the worst could happen? And then you realize that, oh, well, I could handle that. So I won't worry anymore. That's what you mean? That kind of thing?
Yeah,
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, that can help. That can help. Okay, good. And then it kind of fits into the category of controllability or also just the knowledge and predictability, where it's like, okay, I'm not afraid of these fuzzy unknowns. It's like, okay, I've analyzed, I've appraised what might happen. It's like, okay, I can handle it. So it puts it from the unknown to the realm of possibility where, okay, I can handle it. Yeah. So that's a good example. All right. Anything else?
Sometimes talking to myself helps.
Talking to yourself? Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
It can be a way to problem solve. Often people do it to kind of work through a problem. So it's in a way, it's kind of like a form of journaling. You're getting it out.
I'm giving myself a strong vibes about like worst scenarios.
Okay, good. Sure. Okay, it's a way of expressing and working through things. Good. Okay, Beza, I saw yes. Do you have an example? I saw your mic turn off. Oh, maybe not.
No, it's
off again. Okay. I thought I saw, because I have it on speaker mode, so it looked like you were about to speak. Who else would like to share?
Me. For me, it's helpful just to go for a walk in the nature here. So I only have to go like 10 minutes, then I'm in the forest, or just 10 minutes, and then I'm on a canal. So it's really beautiful here. And it helps
Nice.
me a lot. Mostly I connect this with going for a walk with the dog for my grandparents, and that's plus music, and then it's perfect.
Wow, sounds nice. Great strategies. And then with the forest walk, you get both nature and exercise at the same time. And then you add a musical element later, or although, anyway, I was going to say sometimes people will have music playing during the walk. So you got three factors. Okay, great. Okay. Of course, depending on what forest walk, you might want to hear, you'll not have the music too loud. You might want to hear, anyway, that's a practical thing. But very good. Very nice example. Yeah. Love it. Makes a huge difference. Okay. Anybody else want to share?
Yeah, I can share.
Okay.
I like to spend time with friends when I feel too stressed out, because that really helps me.
Sure. We're social beings, and quite often that can be a good way to wind down and cope. Sure. And it's also, if the TED Talk that we didn't watch together, but it's on last week's session e-learning about personality, and there's introvert and extrovert. An extrovert will be something that will calm them down. An introvert can love people, but it might not be a thing that being alone might be the thing that person needs. And this is another good example of the different personality types might have a different coping mechanism that works for them. So, but no, most people That's a very good way to cope. Again, as long, in the extreme examples, if then the friends want to stay out till 4 a.m. drinking, that's different. But this is normal social circumstances, being with friends is very healthy, very healthy. It makes it extra sad during this COVID time when there's a lot of isolation. So a lot of people are suffering when they need that human contact. I mean, thank goodness for Zoom, but it's not the same. Anyway, I feel extra compassion for people who are isolated during this very sad time. And I also, I'm doing extra Zooming myself with family or friends who are alone. My husband as well. He's taking extra courses. He's doing things. He knows people who are isolated, and they've offered. One of them is a history professor here in Prague, and he enjoys the history anyway, but he's like, I will not ever miss one of his classes because he's isolated, and I would never skip a class, not only because it's interesting, but because he's alone, and I just would, it gives him company, as well. Anyway, so, okay, so let's have a couple more examples, and then we'll take a break.
I personally, I started singing, so it's a kind of get my mind off like school and everything. And also with the COVID thing, I started like online shopping, and I don't know why. Yeah.
I mean, by the way, singing has really been shown to, not only are you making music, but you're expressing yourself with your voice, and it's it can be very soothing, very therapeutic. There's a lot of research on that I'm quite familiar with. But also, shopping can, but again, that's one of those things that can be soothing, but it also we can do it in excess. I've been there, but do I really need another pair of shoes? But no, but it's fun. It can be, it's fun. It's nice. Yeah, cool. And window shopping, even around Christmas time, I'm glad that the restrictions are lifted more, not fully, but a little bit more, so that people can get out and hopefully see the beautiful markets. I love the Christmas markets here in Prague. They're so amazing. So, and I worry also for the small shop owners. I want them to make some money, so that's actually a positive way I like to buy, like maybe decorations for the home. And I want to make sure I get them from the small shop owner, especially because they might be suffering. So you're doing like a double whammy. You're having fun shopping, but you're also helping somebody. So that's a good way to kind of get a double dose of goodness or fun, in your life. Oxytocin activation. Anyway, all right. Let's end with one more example.
I think yoga helps a lot.
Yeah, that's a good example.
It forces you to focus on your body instead of focusing on what's in your mind.
Absolutely. That's a great example. That's a classic one. And I think maybe one reason why it's so becoming more and more popular. And it helps you with breathing. Most of the yogic disciplines talk about breathing as well, which is a good segue into the quiz, because I want to remind you to keep breathing even now. Take some deep breaths, slow yourself down, and keep breathing during the quiz. Sometimes we get nervous about stuff. We sometimes have an opposite reaction. We stop breathing sometimes. It's maybe related to the freeze thing. It's the opposite of what we should be doing, but sometimes when we're nervous, we don't breathe as well. So then test it out. Do a low, deep breath. Allow your belly to come out as it should. Just allow the free breathing, and you'll find it can be so soothing. It can help center you, keep your mind, for example, with the quiz.